Welcome. I'm Susan Starr with my co-director, Sarah McCarthy. We are head of program and advocacy for the League of Women Voters of Denver. We are delighted to have you here tonight. Tonight's program is entitled Facts Over Fear, the Value of Denver's Immigrants. The idea of holding a program to highlight the contributions of our immigrant neighbors grew out of two sources. First, I heard our Colorado State Senator Imam Joda and Victoria Francis of the American Immigration Council last fall state that in addition to policies and legislation to protect the rights of immigrants, it's important for Coloradans to know more about all the ways in which immigrants contribute to our society, to our economy, to our institutions. The other source of the focus of tonight's topic is from the League of Women Voters' push to confront the mis and disinformation and sometimes outright lies that are being put out by anti-immigration forces. So to be clear, the positions of the League of Women Voters nationally and locally are focused on challenging the additional funding for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, agencies that are terrorizing our communities, on ensuring that all eligible voters have access to the ballot and that all residents of our country have safe housing, health care, and good education. The need to protect civil rights is evident. Here in Colorado, during the 12-month period starting January 20th of 2025, 4,750 people without legal status were arrested by federal immigration authorities in Colorado, reflecting a near quadrupling of the prior year's arrest rate. The people arrested in Colorado came from more than 80 countries spread across 5 continents. At least 121 of them were younger than 18. Of those over 4,700 people arrested, the largest group, 38%, had no criminal history, compared to nearly 35% with prior convictions and 26% with pending charges. The ICE detention center in Aurora has flexed its capacity to the maximum possible and can now hold 1,500 detainees, according to federal contracting records. Of those 4,750 people arrested in Colorado during Trump's first year back in office, 3,710 have already left the United States, many due to forced self-deportation. So again, more than 62% of those arrested and removed last year had never been convicted of a crime, while more than a third had no criminal history whatsoever. I got these numbers from a Denver Post article published April 6th. Hearing such statistics is alarming, but if, as for many of us sitting here tonight, we have not seen in person these awful actions violating civil and human rights, and may not know anyone personally impacted by ICE activity, statistics can lack a human face to give them meaning. But surely we as residents of Colorado benefit from having immigrants as our neighbors, owners of businesses that we frequent, infrastructure that immigrant tax dollars help to fund, the source of food that we put on our tables, and much more. So tonight you are going to hear from 4 experts who will help us to gain a greater appreciation for the value of immigrants and give us facts to confront those people who believe that immigrants are a drain on our communities. I was going to give wonderful bios for all of these amazing speakers, and I typed those up and I thought, you will want to hear from them, not me talking about them. So on your seats, you have a handout that has the bios of all 4 of our speakers. I'll just mention their names. Esther Tercios from the Colorado Fiscal Institute, Isabel Mendoza from the CU Extension. She's the director of the CU Extension for Denver. Paula Schreiber, president and CEO of the Spring Institute for Intercultural Learning. And Olga Garcia, whose many contributions in Denver are so numerous to list. She, like others of us with graying hair in this room, are retired, but I know Olga, like others of us, never actually retire from working in our communities. So you have their bios. We are trying to tape at least part of this presentation. Lee does not own any fancy equipment yet to tape, but we're going to give this a try tonight. We will have you hold your questions. I think that's okay with the speakers until there's a Q&A at the end. But on the flip side of the bios is a blank page where you can jot down any information that you hear tonight or a question that you might have for a particular speaker. The tape and the slides that the speakers provide tonight will appear on the League of Women Voters of Denver's webpage within, I don't know, a few days. Generally, we don't have any other summer programs other than our, we do have a Drinks and Dialogue on May 14th, and we do have a U.S. Congressional District 1 candidate forum here at the church again at 6:30 on May 28th, and then our annual meeting. These kinds of educational programs we often don't do during the summer, but given what's going on in our country right now, I think we probably will be doing some educational programs this summer. And so check our website or your emails to find out about those things. I also want to mention that if you want to support League of Women Voters and you aren't a member, of course, we would love to have you become a member. And one of our only fundraisers is going to begin soon. We don't have the exact date, but again, the information will be on our webpage. We sell indoor bulbs. And we sell them at this time of year, and then they are delivered in the fall, and they come from the Netherlands. So they're excellent bulbs. So without further ado, I will turn to our speakers.
I'll go to the bottom and down to the top.
Shift the mic up.
Can you hear me now? What's that? Better.
Right into it. I found it.
What's that? All right. It's lovely to see you all. My name is Paula Schreiber. I'm the president and CEO of Spring Institute. I've been at Spring Institute for almost 12 years. My background was actually in international human rights work. I did that for a nonprofit called Freedom House for many years, and then my last couple of years in DC, I was at the State Department where I directed our international human rights work towards the United Nations and other multilateral organizations. So when I moved back to Colorado, I thought, oh, I'm just working at a service provision organization that's helping immigrants and refugees. It'll be so nice to step back from all this stressful human rights work. Yeah. Not so much. Okay. So for those of you who don't know Spring Institute, we were actually founded as an English school here in Denver, primarily catering to foreign students that were coming into our state. And then over the years, as Colorado became a welcoming community for refugees and more immigrants, Spring really expanded its programming. So we're still, I think, very well known for our adult education, for our English classes. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about one of our programs called Colorado Welcome Back that helps internationally trained healthcare professionals get relicensed so that they can work in our communities here. I wanted to give just a quick brief background on sort of what has taken place over the past year. I went through this with a group of donors a couple of weeks ago, and as I was putting it together the night before, I had multiple glasses of wine because it was so traumatic, reliving everything. It has almost been a weekly basis. There's been something new. I didn't list everything here on this little PowerPoint. I did do a little handout though of timeline of different executive actions and policies that have been put in place over the last year that have really traumatized our immigrant communities, including our refugee and asylee communities, who of course, as you know, are here legally, but have been equally attacked. So I did just mention, you know, obviously a huge number of the executive orders issued, including on day one of the Trump administration, were aimed at our immigrant population and really set the tone, immediately referring to our immigrant community as invaders and creating a narrative that our immigrants are takers in our society who are sucking up benefits and services, which of course is completely not backed up by actual fact and data. And so I just listed here, you know, some of the things that we've seen: the militarization of immigration enforcement, this massive increase in ICE's budget. ICE's budget is now larger than all of the main police forces at the federal level combined. It's over $30 billion now annually. And of course, you know, along with it, the brutalization of our communities, not only our immigrants, but our communities of activists and just friends and neighbors who are trying to protect one another, and we've seen violence that comes out of that. I think most surprising to those of us, though, who anticipated, you know, really terrible immigration policies, though, what were the attacks that we've seen on legal forms of immigration, including the refugee resettlement program, the almost elimination of the process of gaining asylum now in our country. So I listed here again some of the big things that we've seen in the past year. There's much more detail in the handout, but really on day one, the refugee resettlement program was shut down. We've seen almost no refugees resettled over the past year, other than a small number of Afghans, but mostly what we saw is this announcement that white South Africans, Afrikaners, were going to be now the new priority for our refugee resettlement program. In addition, we saw people who came here under a status called temporary protected status. We have well over 1 million individuals in this country from over 18 countries that are still very, very unsafe. We've seen temporary protected status being eliminated for many of these populations, putting people in a position of having to decide, do they go back to a situation, if they can. I should just say that self-deportation is very difficult. Many people don't have passports, they don't have documents that allow them to go back to those countries, but having to decide, do they go back to a very unsafe situation, or do they remain here now as an undocumented immigrant in this country with all that that entails. So, but we've seen, you know, again, not only the shutting down of the program, we've seen attacks on these communities. HR 1, the big beautiful bill, took away already SNAP benefits from refugees who had not yet adjusted to become green card holders. But ironically, of course, our U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service was not processing adjustment of status applications for almost all of last year. So people were stuck in a no-win situation. And then those people will be losing their Medicaid federal match on October 1st, which means they'll lose all of their health insurance. So I'm going to talk about some positive things, which are the amazing people who are here in our communities. And I'm going to focus on those folks who've been participating in our Welcome Back program. So these are a subset of immigrants who are highly educated, who were doctors, nurses, pharmacists, etc., in their home countries, but who come here only to find out it's really hard to get relicensed to do that work, even though we have huge need for medical practitioners in our state, particularly folks who are culturally competent, who are linguistically competent. we make it really, really hard, not just as Colorado, but as a country, for folks to get relicensed and to be able to use that tremendous expertise that we already have. So the Welcome Back program that we run at Spring Institute, we started it in 2010. We are part of a national network. So there are 10 other Welcome Back centers throughout the country. We run the Colorado program. And really over the years, kind of depending on what our funding looks like, we've been able to help. At some point, we've only had funding for refugees. At other point, we've had funding for any immigrants. And sometimes we've only had funding for nurses and doctors. Sometimes we have funding for oral healthcare professionals. Right now, we are able to serve doctors, nurses, and oral healthcare professionals, including dentists, to get back on that relicensure pathway. And we're able to help both immigrants and refugees who are a subcategory of immigrants. And so what do? We meet with them, we recruit them, we find out what their profession was in their home country, and we tell them what the pathway would be to get back into that exact profession here in Colorado. But it's not always realistic, for people to be able to do that depending on what their personal circumstances are. Doctors pretty much have to start over. We do not recognize their degrees from most other countries. They have to take and pass all of the board exams in English, as well as an English occupational test. They have to get their credentials evaluated, which can be an expensive and tedious process. And then they have to match to residencies, even if they were a practicing physician in their other country. And because the residency match process in the United States is really built entirely around our system of medical schools, it's very difficult for international medical graduates, called IMGs, to match to those residencies. In Colorado, unfortunately, has one of the lowest match rates for IMGs in the entire country. We average about 2% on each year of our residencies going towards international medical graduates, compared to like a state like New York, admittedly a vastly larger immigrant population. They match about 30% of their residencies to immigrants, to IMGs. So one of the things that we did a few years ago at Spring Institute was recognizing how difficult we were making it for doctors in our country. Is we thought, gosh, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be an easier way, a better pathway to get these folks. We have entire counties in the state of Colorado that don't have a single practicing physician. And we've got all these amazing physicians here who can't get relicensed. And really what we heard from talking to various partners, including our friends at Denver Health, who are probably the most diverse, I would say, in terms of their clinical staff in Colorado, forget about Greater Denver, but we talked to all the hospitals and the folks who are part of the stakeholders of this process and said, what could we do? Like if we passed a bill that set up a system where, for instance, you could just supervise an international doctor for a while, and then that could put them on the pathway to relicensure, would you do it? And because other states were toying with this model. And we heard a lot of pushback and saying, yeah, I don't think we'd hire people that way. The insurance is so expensive. The clinical experience that international doctors have can vary so widely, not only by country, but frankly, even within a country. Sometimes we wouldn't feel comfortable that they have that clinical experience. So you can pass the bill, you can go ahead, but we're not gonna hire them. And so we're like, well, that doesn't relate to us. Good. That's not. So we went through this process with a standing task force that Colorado has that looks at the medical profession. And we looked at other models that other states were doing, and we passed a bill that kind of created a program here in Colorado where internationally trained doctors could go get clinical experience at a hospital they train, and then we'd work with them on their residency matching process to see if we finally break through this barrier and get a bunch of folks matched to residency. So we passed the bill. We didn't write it explicitly for ourselves or for Denver Health, who ended up being our partner, but we managed to get funding for 3 years. Denver Health did partner with us on it, and they have run this amazing 9-month clinical training program now. We're in the 3rd year, that for each year they bring in competitively 4 physicians who come to spring. We've already been working with them on coaching them and training them and getting their credentials and their studying, whatever. And they give them this clinical training. And it has been amazing. So the first 2 cohorts that finished, we've now had 100% success rate matching them to residencies, and 7 of them matched here in Colorado. So in the past, Spring Institute, we had been able to match people to residencies, but we lost all of them. We'd only had 1 person ever match in Colorado before. And typically where you go do your residency, that's where you're going to work and that's where you're going to live. So we were losing all of this talent to other states. And so I listed here some of the individuals. These are the first 8. All 8 of them matched. 3 of them matched the first year. 1 woman did not match that first year. We continued to work with her. And then all 4 in the second cohort, plus the woman who hadn't matched the first year, just matched in March. And as you can see, not only are they in Colorado, but they are in communities that have tremendous need for physicians. So over these course now of 2 years, we've had 2 different folks match out to Grand Junction, 2 different folks matched to Pueblo. We have somebody up in Westminster, somebody in Alamosa, which is amazing. We had our first match actually at Denver Health, for the first time they ever matched one of our internationally trained physicians. So coming out of their own training, they were smart enough to snap that person up. But as you can see, they're really from all over. So the first year, somehow the Sudanese community really got the message that we were running this program, and they all ran around, because they all know each other, they all ran around and recruited each other. And there was this amazing batch of doctors. We had 4 female doctors from Sudan were the first cohort. And then over the course of that year, we were able to really get the word out among all communities. And then in the second year, we've got folks from Myanmar, Iraq, Bangladesh, Eritrea. And the current cohort is very, very diverse as well. So these folks are out in these communities. The first group has been out there for a year, practicing in positions in parts of the state that desperately, desperately needed their expertise. So I think I am probably at time. Yes, I'm over time. And I just wanted to share a couple of other things with you. There's this handout is sort of something that Spring Institute created with some of our partners about what you can do. Sometimes we feel really helpless as just an individual. We're not attached to an organization. Ideas about ways in which you can advocate and support our immigrant community. And in the back table there, I didn't hand these out to everybody, but if you're interested, we are having our annual event and fundraiser in June. So feel free to take a look, take a little snapshot of the URL, and you can get information about that event. So let's stop there.
Way down. Heels on. Sorry. Hello, can everyone hear me? Well, good evening, everyone. So good to be here with you all. My name is Esther Lucios. I'm the Deputy Director of the Colorado Fiscal Institute. So excited to be here with you all today. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how immigrants are a vital part of Colorado's communities and our state and local economies. So we're going to do a little bit of myth busting today, share some facts with you all about the tremendous contributions that our immigrant families, community members make in the state of Colorado. If you don't know who we are, the Colorado Fiscal Institute, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy advocacy organization. We've been around in some form or iteration since the late 90s and officially SCFI since 2012. And we advocate for tax, budget, and economic policies that really center community And we do that through our pillars of research, advocacy at both the legislature and the ballot, strategic communication, and state budget. Just a little roadmap for you all of what to expect today. I have a really short presentation. We're going to just go through some myth busting, really providing an overview of economic contributions of immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, the impacts of attacks on our immigrant families, which Paula shared quite a bit about, and just end with ways that we can all share about how to get involved in support. Oh, okay. Final slide got messed up there, apologies, but I wanted to start this conversation by framing what we're going to talk about today around this idea of immigrants just being for people, right? There are neighbors and our families and friends. For me, this is always a personal conversation because my parents are immigrants and I'm proudly a first generation daughter of immigrants. And so a lot of the times when we have these conversations about the economic contributions of immigrants, we're reminded by many of our partners that it's hard to hear sometimes and have these conversations because we always have this conversation in this small bubble of reducing people to numbers and how much they contribute. And so I wanted to have this conversation and remind everyone that immigrants, no matter where you come from, the only difference between us is our immigration status, right? And that the numbers are important. And I wanted to reframe that conversation. It is not that we are reducing folks to a number, is that we, especially for immigrant communities, there's ownership that can be had when you understand that you invest in a community and that your contributions may play a really big role in helping to create healthy and thriving communities. And so that's the framing that I hope that we all take into this conversation. So a quick overview for you all of immigrants in Colorado statewide. So we have over 560,000 immigrants who call Colorado home. That's nearly 10% of Colorado's population. Some top countries of origin include Mexico and India, Vietnam, China, and Canada. Immigrants in the state of Colorado have contributed over $7 billion in local, state, and federal taxes in just 2023 alone. They only make up about 10% of the population, but make up nearly 12% of the workforce. Those top workforce industries are agriculture and forestry, construction, manufacturing, transportation, and warehouse. So going through a few myth-busting information. So there's a lot of myths around how immigrants hurt American workers and the labor force. But we know that immigrants are actually business owners and entrepreneurs who fuel economic growth. In Colorado, 18% of Main Street businesses are owned by immigrants, and those are businesses who help keep downtown areas, whether that's Denver downtown, or Main Street of a specific city or county, going. They make up 18% of nursing assistants, 60% of software developers, 23% of cooks. So immigrants are a vital part of our economic growth and fuel businesses in Colorado. Immigrants are taxpayers. There's a lot of misinformation about immigrants just eating up from the system, but we know that immigrants pay taxes and make significant contributions to state, local, and federal economies. So in 2023 alone, immigrants paid over $7 billion in taxes, $2.5 billion in state and local taxes, over $5 billion in federal taxes. They have over $21 billion in spending power. Undocumented immigrants as well make significant contributions to our state and local taxes. They contributed over $400 million in state and local taxes in 2022 alone. And we know that that would increase to over $500 million if they are granted work authorization. So all these barriers that, as Paul was talking about, that folks face in being able to access work and have proper work authorization just really keeps them from being full contributors to our economies. Immigrants invest in public services. They are not a burden to our essential services. They make significant investments as well into healthcare, transportation, our K-12 education. In 2023, immigrants contributed over nearly $3 billion to Social Security, over $749 million to Medicare. And for undocumented immigrants who contribute to all of these services, they contribute knowing that they can't actually benefit from these essential programs. So in 2022, undocumented immigrants paid nearly $400 million in Social Security taxes, knowing that they can't access those benefits upon retirement. They can't access Medicare, yet contributing nearly $100 million in Medicare payroll taxes, 27 million in unemployment insurance taxes, even though they don't have access to those benefits should they lose their job. I want to talk a little bit about HR 1 or the LWVDA bill. We refuse to, if I could call it a big, that bill. So there was a lot that bill did in terms of taxes and spending. On the tax side, it provided really big tax cuts to large corporations at the expense of many services and programs that we care about, SNAP, Medicaid being at the top of that. There's been a lot of considerable and needed conversation about how that bill also directs huge amounts of unprecedented funding towards Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense, including over $170 billion in additional funding for immigration and border enforcement activities. So unprecedented amounts of funding in just one bill, which we know is directed towards increasing detention centers, more arrests. Border wall construction is also a big part of that, and paying for those investments through massive fee hikes on immigration relief and due process, new financial barriers for immigrants that's really impacting immigrants with low resources. And to give you just an example of that, oh, I missed mine. I didn't make it in there, but just to give you an example of some of those fee hikes, the asylum application fee prior to HR 1 passing was $0. There's a new $100 increase on that. For special immigrant juvenile status, there was no fee for that prior to HR 1 passing. There is now a $250 fee just for the application. TPS, temporary protected status, there was a $50 fee to apply. There is now a $500 fee on that, plus $30 in biometrics. So really, again, really harmful enforcement and immigration funding for Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, really making it harder for the immigrants who are still calling Colorado home to be able to contribute to our community economy. The other slide didn't make it in there, but I just wanted to provide some of that information, do a little bit of myth busting so that you remember anytime you're talking to folks and you know, in your community as well, that immigrants are our community members, our family members, and they make huge contributions to our communities and our economy. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. I'm just going to tell a few stories. I love the statistics, though, and I think they're very important. They do absolutely frame the individual story, the individual person that struggles so hard to get to this country, and sometimes only be met with nothing but terrible things in their pathway. So my name is Olga Garcia. I'm the former director of the Denver Human Rights and Community Partnerships, the Aging Division. I was there for about 6.5 years, and I loved every minute of it, but it was time for me to retire for the second time in my career, so I did so in January of this year. Prior to that, I worked at Denver Health, so the information that I was imparted to us by Patricia was very dear to my heart. I'm so happy to see that they're working with you, all of the medical, not just doctors and nurses, of course, but there's so many other jobs that the medical industry provides, and we need help in every one of those sectors. So thank you for just promoting the medical system to everybody. So real quick, I wanted to also mention that I'm not considered an immigrant myself, or neither were my parents. My ancestors were descendants from Mexico, Spain, the indigenous people of the Southwest where we live today. My family settled in New Mexico more than 400 years ago, long before the landing of the Mayflower in New England. Over time, some of us moved and settled across the Southwest United States. It's important also to know that today more than 80% of Hispanics are not considered recent immigrants, like a lot of people think. I brought a few copies of the new report published by Immigrants US, and it's the back table there, but the league will also have copies of it. It's very interesting to see their report from this National Hispanic Nonprofit Association that's the largest in our country. So they're an incredible machine in terms of data mining all by themselves. The reports also here locally that the Latino economic output in Colorado exceeds 40 billion annually, representing a significant share of the state's GDP. Also, Latinos make up more than 22% of Colorado's population and 21% of the local total workforce in the state here, with a labor participation rate of 72% versus the average overall rate of 69%. So we're hard workers, right? I didn't want to mix any more numbers up because I would absolutely trust the numbers that Esther just gave us to look at the contributions specifically from immigrants that live and work here as well. And you know, of course, most Americans can trace their immigrant lineage from across the globe, right? Many embrace and celebrate cultures and heritage, not just of our own, but from others that can be very different from ours. I want to spotlight two first-generation immigrants whose paths were very different, arriving in the U.S., but similar in the resiliency and quest for a better life in this country. I believe we are much stronger together as we forge a path for future generations. This is a story about Carna de Hall. That's his picture of his family there. Carna joined our community in 2014 when he immigrated to the United States. Born and raised in Bhutan, Carna owned and operated a successful farm with his wife and children. He had fields, large fields of corn, lemon and orange trees, and more than 50 head of cattle. Tragically, in 1993, the government there suddenly declared Carna an illegal immigrant. Though he had lived and was born in Bhutan, he lived there his entire life. He was not considered ethnically Bhutanese and was expelled from the country. For the next 21 years of his life, he lived in a Nepali refugee camp. In the camp, Carna volunteered to help his community. He worked with non-governmental organizations to distribute supplies, assisted with the organization and management of the camp. As years passed, it became clear that Carna and his family would never be able to return to Bhutan. In 2007, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, along with 8 partner countries, agreed to begin resettling Bhutanese refugees permanently. And so Carna applied for his family to come to the U.S. And in 2014, yes, 7 years later, his application was accepted. Immediately upon arriving in the U.S., Carna and his family were placed here in Denver at Hidden Brook Apartments that is operated by the nonprofit organization Hope Communities. Somebody's here from Hope. I think that can, here she is. There's Laura. Thank you, Laura. Anyway, so Laura Ann Frey, who's back there in the audience, she manages the refugee resettlement program at Home Communities, and we're grateful for their work. Carter and his wife receive assistance navigating the healthcare system and have enrolled in the elder daycare program there, where he interacts with others his age and explores the community. He has made friends with other Bhutanese and Nepali families at Hidden Brook, and they help him learn about his new home here. Carter's new life at Denver is filled with opportunity and family as a new grandfather and a proud father of 3 adult children. Even while still learning English and with a little formal education, he brings his agricultural knowledge to enhance Hidden Brook's community gardens. His garden provides a bit of familiarity in his new world. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Wanda Bordas. She's become a personal friend of mine, and might all recognize her. So, of course, the league goes way back with Wanda, you know that. So she departed Nicaragua at age 3 with her mother and siblings on a banana boat and met up with her father, who sent for them from Miami. She said, "I was the first in my family to go to college. When I graduated, I wanted to give back just as my parents had done for me. I joined the Peace Corps and worked in the barrios of Santiago, Chile, helping low-income women develop work cooperatives so that they could feed their families. This early decision set my life on a path of service and reconnected me to my Latina soul." She goes on to say that my destino, or my destiny, led me to do the work I do today. I know that as an immigrant, Latina, from a low-income family with 7 brothers and sisters, it was not going to be easy. I learned to be resourceful, scrappy, talented, and a street smart. It was a perfect preparation for me to become a leader, an author of 3 books, and a teacher. Today, in her early 80s, Wanda Bordas shows no sign of slowing down. She's president of the Mestiza Leadership International, a company that focuses on leadership, diversity, and organizational change. She's recognized as an elder and icon in that space, and she works tirelessly on behalf of Latinos and other communities of color. Her many achievements include being the first Latina faculty at the Center for Creative Leadership, the most highly utilized executive program in the world. As a leader, teacher, activist, and author of 3 books that sold over 65,000 copies and is still going, Dr. Bordas continues sharing wisdom and insights with people across the globe. Her career markers are numerous, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of really good ones that I think deserve to be acknowledged. She's an advisor to Harvard's Hispanic Journal on Public Policy and the Kellogg National Fellows Program. She's the founder of Denver's Mikasa Women's Resource Center and was the executive director there until 1986. She's the founding president and CEO of the National Hispanic Leadership Institute that she established in 1967. And I myself participated in that one in 2000. She received the Martin Luther King Social Responsibility Award in 2008, several prestigious book awards, and she was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. She's absolutely a superstar in our community. So these just a handful of cultural, the spotlights of the cultural scene in the Denver metro area across Colorado. We're so fortunate to have these groups with us all the time. Museo de las Americas, the left here, they're in the Santa Fe Arts District. 2 of their 4 executive directors in the past 35 years have been first-generation immigrant women from Mexico. The first Spanish language radio station was started in the 1950s by Papa Sanchez. He was from Guadalajara, Mexico, and initially broadcasted from out of his home. There's a park in West Denver named in his honor, the Papa Sanchez Park. Zenon C. Ferrofino pictured in the middle there. He's from Bolivia. He started a furniture store business that led to the purchase of KBNO Spanish language radio station. And he is deeply committed to the community through philanthropy by starting up Robbie's, community for children's cancer patients. Artistico is a relatively new dance troupe that trains Mexican folk dancers of all ages. One of its founders is a first-generation immigrant from Mexico. Denver Public Library's Plaza program started 20 years ago and is designed for newcomers. It offers a wide variety of programs from U.S. citizenship test prep to technology, socialization, and other resources in 9 of the branch libraries across Denver. Micasa's Resource Center has been a vital resource for over 50 years. I think this year they're celebrating 52 years actually. That helps adults with employment and business ownership. Its founder, Juan Borges, who I mentioned, is an immigrant, and also its current CEO, Angeles Ortega, is from Mexico. Many festivals throughout the year showcase culture and heritage from across the world, such as the popular Asian American and Pacific Islander, short for AAPI, Happy Heritage Month Culture Fest. That'll be held this year on May 22nd at Civic Central Park. There are more than 30,000 nonprofit organizations across Colorado that serve our communities every day, thankfully. So here's just a handful of immigrant resource organizations. Of course, you know, I didn't consider the one that I should have, which is the Spring Institute. But these are all here, and I didn't put their email addresses or anything because they're so easy to find. Just Google them, of course. They work collaboratively with local government agencies to address the needs of our immigrant neighbors. There are a lot of online navigation tools that provide category listings, and many of them are offered in different languages. And I think the city as well as the state now offers more than 70 languages on their websites for resources. Here are a few contacts in HRCP, the city agencies where I recently retired from as director of the Aging Division, as I mentioned. The Denver Human Rights and Community Partnership Agency has served residents for nearly 80 years. I can believe that. The Aging Division, about 45 years actually. So I was a newcomer 6.5 years ago. My colleagues at HRCP are some of the most caring people you'll ever meet, and they provide assistance to all that are in need. So with that, I'd like to thank you for welcoming us tonight, and I look forward to any questions for the group. Thank you.
Also gonna add a timer because I. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh. There you go.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Isabel Mendoza. I am the director of the CSU Denver Extension Office here in Denver. I don't know if you're all familiar with Extension. Extension is a division in Colorado State University. There are extension offices all across the country. There is more like 3,000. Extension is a really old organization, more than 100-year-old. We're organized in every county, and it's a partnership between the federal government, the state government, in our case in Colorado State University, and local government, the city and county of Denver, right? So we are basically employees of all three, which is not complicated at all. But Extension
was created with this idea that universities are creating and building knowledge. And that knowledge is incredible, but it's not as incredible if the people who needs it cannot access it, right? Because nobody's out there reading scientific papers that are completely dry and boring as hell. So the idea of extension was to take all that knowledge, make it easy and practical for the people. Since the 1960s, we had extension offices in urban areas. The Denver Extension Office is the only 100% urban extension in Colorado. So the idea is that urban areas have different challenges than the ones in urban areas. So we offer a lot of non-credit courses, all sorts of stuff from Colorado State University, as many universities that are state universities, started as agricultural schools. So we are still very tied to that tradition. So we teach a lot of gardening, horticulture, pest management, native landscaping, that kind of stuff. But we also offer other kind of things like canning and financial literacy, citizenship, English as a second language, all sorts. So that's my elevator pitch for the session. But I also here, more importantly, talking as an immigrant. If you read my bio, I have been in the United States for about 20 years. I came as a 22-year-old. But I also kind of been an immigrant all my life because I was born in Peru. And I was there until about when I was 7 years old. My dad is Peruvian, and then my mom was Ecuadorian. She moved us to Ecuador when they separated. So I grew up in Ecuador, and I had to, had that experience of being an immigrant in Latin America, and then I moved to the United States. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is basically divided in two parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about farm workers and farm work, because I'll explain why it'll be very obvious. But the second part is more about my personal experience and how I am constantly, daily, kind of figure out what my identity as an immigrant really is. So we're gonna all work together and you're gonna help me figure it out, right? So the second part is a little bit more of a discussion because when I got a very kind invitation for this talk, one of the things that I keep thinking about is how did we allow to begin with to create those myths about people, right? And more my brain went to what do we do practically to counteract it? So like when somebody tells us something, how we can go like all ninja or like all of those facts that we can get it, because we're not always gonna learn and understand or be able to counter fake facts, right? Or not fake facts, but like if somebody tells us a number and we don't know the real one, how are we gonna counter that narrative? So the idea is that what we could do is to learn reframe things in a way that the numbers are not as important. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. So the first part about agricultural work is very easy. Without immigrants, undocumented, there is no agriculture. That's my talk. Thank you. About 40% of all agricultural workers in the U.S. Have been born outside of the United States. From that, only 30% are not U.S. citizens, right? So, and by agricultural work, that means the whole sector of agriculture. So it's a bigger sector. It includes people that work in management, in farms, and other agricultural related. But if we kind of sum in a little bit, promise those are the only statistics that I'm going to show you. The large majority of, if we talk specifically about farm work, which is actually the people doing the very narrow specific work of mostly cultivation, like the people that you see putting the plant on the ground and picking the fruit. Those are the farm workers. It goes up to, in 2021, about 60%. So again, no immigrants, no food. It's just as simple as that. There is no way around it. One way, when we talk about documented immigrants, sometimes we don't understand that many of those documented immigrants come to the United States as H-2A temporary agricultural workers, which means that they are in the United States 10 months out of the year. They don't pay into Social Security and Medicare, but they do pay into income taxes, federal, local, state taxes, for benefits and privileges they will never see, because they cannot stay here for more than those 10 months. They get shipped back, they get shipped in the next year. Oftentimes, year after year after year, the same people come back, right? Without those workers, again, there is no system. As you can imagine, that system is riddled with abuse. Because you, as an agricultural worker with an H-2A visa, depend directly on your employer or employer. If your employer doesn't want you anymore because you're too loud, you have an opinion, off you go, and you will never come back, right? So it's based on exploitation, basically. So, but how did we get here? Oh, by the way, sorry, before I say that, I'm gonna mention something about the history of how we got here. But when we talk about history, we also think about the past 100 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it is. But 4 days ago, for the first time, maybe ever, maybe in a long time. No, it's not ever, in a long time. Rights that people have won in Colorado were taken back. In 2021, agricultural workers were given the right to get overtime pay after they work 48 hours. Now it's 56. So my question to you is, how have we as society and as people allow for the people that put food on our table to be treated so bad? And that's what I keep thinking about. How did we get to create all these myths about people? So yeah, and by the way, we have a trifecta, right? This is not about politics. This is not about partisan. This is not about Democrats, about Republicans. This is something that happened bipartisan, right? We needed both sides of the aisle to come to an agreement. And that's the one thing they came to agree upon.
Democrats sponsored that bill.
Yeah. And the governor's gonna sign it.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. And I just have to say, this full disclosure, because I'm an immigrant, I am not a US citizen, I have a green card. I am not allowed to vote, right? I am not allowed to vote, I'm not allowed to sign for petitions of any kind, but I'm allowed to pay for it because I pay taxes as well. Taxation without representation, we had a war about it, I think. Just so you know, neither do farm workers, right? They pay a lot. How much did we say? $7.7 billion? Taxation without representation. That's my personal opinion, not representing CSU in Michigan. We got here because of the Fair Labor Standards of 1938, which established the minimum wage, overtime pay. So after 40 hours, which also established the 40 hours work week, and after 40 hours, you get time and a half, prohibits employment of minors in oppressive child, but exempted farm workers, domestic labor, and tip employees that get paid, it allowed tip employees to get paid below minimum wage. Other things, other people, other groups were also added to this. They were not only exempted, but things were repealed and changed throughout time. These are basically the ones that have stayed pretty static for the most part. Some states, because this is a federal law, some states have changed. California, for example, have added protections, but for the most part, nationwide, this is pretty much what it is since 1938. You should learn about the history, how that happened, because it's fascinating. It has to do with racism. I'm just gonna give it away. I'm gonna give the twist to the story. So yeah, I think understanding history and how we get to where we are is very important to change the pathway of that history moving forward. So yeah, that's the part about farm workers that I wanted to talk about. So the second part is how do we counter myths and why? And again, this is the part that rather than statistics or, it's statistics and numbers, it comes more from my experience. And again, I'm a human being, I'm still learning and I'm still processing what it means to be an immigrant for myself. But I don't talk for every immigrant in the country, right? I only talk for myself and my experience. I don't talk for anybody else. So a lot of people might find these, so like, yeah, I feel the exact same way, and other people do. So when we talk about, I don't know what that ended up being so little, I'm sorry. But the first line says, appreciate without romanticizing. What I mean about that is that we talk about immigration and how wonderful immigrants are and how they came to this country and became successful, but we don't talk about the pain of immigration, right? What we leave behind that we will never get back, basically. And I think it is important to talk about that too when we talk about immigration in this country. Because when we come here, we will never belong home anymore, but we will never be Americans either. And that really sucks. So when you appreciate who we are and all the contributions, remember that we give more than our labor. So I knew that part is gonna be. Deal with it. Reject victimhood and sainthood as prerequisites for humanity. This is also called kind of a new-ish concept, but it's also called the politics of appeal. So basically, how we use qualifiers as requisites for human rights. So that's kind of what I mean when you hear something, you might not know the data point exactly to counter that fact, but you can understand things like statements that you hear. She was a mother, she was a hard worker, and things like that, that are not bad. It's not bad that we're saying this person works hard, this person is a mother, but underneath that statement, we need to understand that our value as human beings goes beyond our labor and the relationship we have with others, right? That I'm not a mother, is my life still worth it, right? And that applies to everybody, not just to immigrants, but also when we talk about criminality, when we talk about immigration, when we talk about everything, it applies to everything. It seems like sometimes when we want to explain why it's wrong to exploit somebody or to kill somebody, we need to tell people why that life was worth it before. He wasn't a criminal. Well, we have laws for that. It's not enough to be a criminal to be killed on the street, right? So if we hear statements like that, we need to reconsider and really think about it, like, why are we hearing it? and if it's really necessary to the conversation, right? Examine language that excuses exploitation. I know that a couple years ago when George Floyd was murdered, there were like some people saying, well, he gave a $20 fake bill. Okay? Right? Or, well, that person loves their job, but the opposite to that is like, what if a person didn't love their job? Most of us don't, except me. I do love my job, right? So like thinking about things like that and reframing them in a way that that makes it that centers the humanity of people and nothing else. Also recognize individual experiences. I think, again, I don't speak for every immigrant here or anywhere else. And I just think that one thing that maybe I personally don't want is be put in a box, right? To recognize that we are all different, that our experience coming to this country, being here is very different. And learning about those experiences, we cannot tie with the next one, learn about cultural histories, it's also really important. There are a lot of literature out there, I'll show you a couple, that tells different stories. So like, and there's like just learning about those different stories is very important. And then, I hope this one is not, learn about cultural history, but especially US foreign relationships is very important. I think that we are getting to the point where there is more understanding out there and more information about the kind of influence the United States has had in the world as a whole. And we need to maybe reanalyze that, see the history that the United States has with Latin America and with other countries across the globe, and how that affects you, and how that affects them, and how that interrelates on how we relate to each other as well. So, I like that quote, but I think it's important. Still, there is no denying that there is a hierarchy of lives. The passports are a currency. And here is just a list. I meant to actually put the names of the books. You can see them, but there is a lot of really great information. I'm reading this book currently and like cannot stop. Solito is actually, I don't know if you heard about it, but it's the story of, it's a memoir, it's the story of Javier Zamora, the author, that tells you when he came from El Salvador all the way to the US with a coyote, and how that trip actually is like, because he took the banana boat from Guatemala all the way to Mexico, and then it's really heartbreaking, but it's very important kind of narrative. I really love Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, because it really tells you what kind of life people live as undocumented people in the United States. And I love the tone because it's very unapologetic. It's just, and he won a Pulitzer Prize, not for this book, but for other things that he's done. So anyway, I'm talking too much, so if you want more recommendations, I got a bunch. So yeah.
Oh my, what wonderful presentations. We have a handheld mic. Sarah, would you like to just take that around? And unless you have a really wonderful booming voice, please use the mic to ask questions. One of the things while Sarah's walking around and you're thinking about questions, I want to let you know that the League of Women Voters of the United States is in a lawsuit with the federal government because
against the federal
government. because we have for decades been present at naturalization services to register people to vote as soon as they become citizens. And the current administration has said that we are no longer allowed to do that. The League of Women Voters of the US is fighting that. So I just wanted to give you one of the things that I think is that we're so proud of about the League and how the League interrelates with immigrant communities. Questions of our speakers?
Good evening, thank you. I've now retired from Denver Public Schools, but I taught with them for over 20 years. Most of my time was actually in the Southwest at Lincoln. And I will say that the DACA policy that Obama instituted was a life-changing policy that I could definitely see had an enormous impact on the kiddos. And of course, that was, I don't know that it was completely repealed, but it was definitely rolled back. But what, when students are applying to colleges now, is their information kept confidential, even if it's at a public institution? Do we know that?
Who would like the answer?
If the public institution is an educational institution, there is FERPA, which is the one that protects the all records, all education records. So like if I'm teaching a class and the student is part of CSU, I cannot give their information to other people. They make us do that training every year. I don't deal directly with the students. I don't remember the details, but technically there is. Technically there is some protections, but under the current administration, what can continue to be private versus what it is
Very. Another question.
Esther, I believe it was you who mentioned that immigrants are taxpayers. And I think ICE has been using taxpayer rolls to ferret out people without status. Has this affected immigrants' willingness to pay taxes if they have an option to pay or not to pay?
Great question, and actually in the vein of the question you just asked, the National Immigration Law Center just put out a lot of resources during tax season, which we are just wrapped. Unfortunately, the current administration did pass executive orders requiring the IRS to share information with DHS. So I think right now the goal really is to make sure that we are getting information from credible sources and passing as much of that information over to immigrant folks, whatever their status, particularly undocumented folks, to make sure that they have all the information to make the best decision that they can. So if they want to file their taxes, they absolutely still can. And as much as we can is just informing them of the current playing field and the risks, unfortunately, that they are experiencing. And so it has had ripple effects where folks are considering whether or not they should file their taxes, which is a double-edged sword, right? Because so many folks on the path to wanting to become citizens, so much of what you're told is, make sure that you model being a good person, and so much of that is around paying taxes. And so it's really a double-edged sword if they are fearful, rightfully so, of filing their taxes, because that information will be shared, to then be able to show proof that they actually have been filing taxes. National Immigration Law Center is had a bit of guidance on this recently.
I'm just going to add, it'll be very interesting to see how much taxes are paid by ITIN holders this year compared to previous years. So ITINs are a number, if you don't have a social security number, undocumented individuals have always been encouraged. Most of them are trying to adjust their status to pay taxes, to be a good person, even though they know they're not going to get any of the benefits back from that money. But it's something like, I think it's 90 billion a year in item taxes that are paid. It's a significant amount of money, all from undocumented individuals paying with item numbers. So it'll be really interesting to see this next year how that goes down. And I think it will go down. It's called ITIN, I-T-I-N.
Oh,
It's
that number.
that number, it's instead of a social security.
Taxpayer identification number.
Yeah.
So this may be a very basic question, and maybe all of you know the answer to it, so, but can you explain to me the process from getting a green card? Where does it come from? How long does it last? How come you have to renew every, whatever, 2 years, 15 months, whatever? And how does that get you to where you want to go? Which I would assume is possibly citizenship.
I think you need a lot more time than we have. It's not a simple answer anymore. It used to be, I think, a much more simple answer, but it's becoming really complicated. And so I know from refugees, for instance, when you are granted refugee status, after a year arriving in the United States, you can apply to adjust your status to become a green card holder. And then after 5 years, you can apply for US citizenship. But through each of those stages, there is an application process. It used to be relatively easy. It used to be something you could do without spending a lot of money on legal assistance, but both the applications now are very expensive, and US Citizenship and Immigration Services for almost this past year has not even been processing applications for adjustment of status by refugees and other humanitarian visa holders who were previously eligible to apply for adjustment of status. I don't know outside of the refugee world what that process looks like, but they basically, in Colorado alone, we know we've got 7,000 refugees and asylees who have been accessing, and victims of trafficking. So there's other humanitarian groups who, for instance, they're part of this group that, their adjustment of status applications have not been processed. And because they haven't adjusted status, they are going to lose their Medicaid federal match, which means they lose all health insurance. Colorado 100% does not have the ability to pick up insurance for those populations. So this whole adjustment of status thing has become a huge issue because it's now tied to benefits, and yet they're not processing. So I don't know if folks know about the other, outside of refugees, what the green card process.
And does the work permit come first?
It can, yes. Refugees all have work permits. They are immediately granted work authorizations, as well as temporary protected status holders. Some humanitarian parolees, but not all of them. It's hugely complicated. There are like 20 different visa designations, and they're all different.
It's almost impossible, basically. Even if you apply for a visa, if you are a victim of a crime and you can apply for a visa, it takes about 10 years to actually get it. And that's just a visa. To get a visa, for them to be eligible to get a green card is very difficult. For a work permit, I mean, if you are a refugee, but there also they used to be, I don't know if it's still true, but there are a couple of very specific jobs that you can get like a work visa into the US. Those are either very temporary, but they're also tied to your employer, which means that if you're unlucky and you get a crappy employer, if you complain, you go. And that happens not just with H-2A visa holders, that happens at all levels. I had a friend that was doing a PhD in like biotechnology or something like that years ago, and her boss treated it really bad. She worked in a lab, they did cancer research, and he hired only all immigrants. He treated them horribly, and none of them complained, because if they complain, off they go. To get a green card is very difficult now. But then you need to get at least 5 years for more of them, have like a green card for at least 5 years, depends on how you got it.
Exactly. Before you can even apply.
Before you can even apply. If you got one through marriage, you can apply one for 2 years and then you get one for 10 years, but after 5 years of having the 10 year, you can apply for citizenship. I just can tell you, I just applied for citizenship maybe like 8 months ago. It cost me $5,000 and I haven't seen anything. So it's gonna take a year, maybe 2, maybe I will never see it, who knows? It's extremely difficult, it's extremely expensive, and it's kind of dangerous too, to a degree at this point.
I can quickly add, I think to what, you know, we're speaking of in terms of the narratives. You know, we're sitting here and we've worked in these spaces where we work in immigration or with immigrant populations. And so much of what you hear is, well, they came here the right way. Fight that crap. That's ridiculous. There is no right way. And so much of why it's so hard to answer your question is that so much of this is confusing, and it all depends on how you entered the country. And how you entered the country, to what you were saying, is so dependent on the US's relationship with specific countries. And that is all tied into politics at any given time. And so, you know, fight back against those myths of they did it correctly. No, it was just at that time. Yeah.
Why don't you just do it the legal way?
The legal way. And as you can see, when folks are trying to do things the right way or the legal way, they face barrier on top of barrier on top of barrier. That makes it harder. And so no person, if you see any documentary, read any of the books, no person in their right mind would leave their home country, their families, and face death right in front of them in terms of having to cross borders, if not for something better. And they would not choose that path if there were the right way to do it, the legal way to do it.
Thank you, because that reminds me on something. When I came to the United States, I came as an au pair. So basically that's a domestic worker. They call it an au pair because it sounds fancy, but basically you are a living nanny. And the program cost the family that I was hosting me about $40,000 to $50,000. I only saw about 7,000 of those. And from those 7,000, my mom paid 4,000 in Ecuador for the program because it was an educational program. My family, on top of the $140 they pay me per week for 45 hours of work, they also gave me $500 for education. And I was very lucky because my family was good. The kiddo that I took care of was a baby, adorable. But I also live in a city and they treat me well. So I was one of the lucky ones. But the company that the family hired got half of the money. And the only reason why I was able to get a visa is because when I show up at the embassy in Quito, I feel I have this much paper saying that my mom owned 3 houses, that she had a paid job, that she had education, that we had, I grew up in Ecuador, upper middle class. If I didn't, I would have not made it with a visa. If I didn't make it with a visa, I would have not been able to become a permanent resident later. But the people that actually needed way more than I did, they don't have money for a passport. A passport in Ecuador costs $190 US dollars, right? If you have the time, because you have to go to the capital. So if you have to go to the capital, stay there, do an appointment, and pay, it's extremely expensive. It's impossible for people. The people that need it, they can. They only have one way if they are really desperate.
Another question? Thank you. It is very complicated. I've heard that there's a lottery depending on what country you come from. you may not be able, your number may not come up for 20 years. You know, so I think that's another education session, and myth busting.
I just want to comment, you know how you get all those things in the mail and the candidates say, what are the important points of these Democrats, lots of mine come from Democrats. Immigration is never on the list. It's never listed. I always have to type in immigration reform. It's not on the list.
Thanks.
What is the current state of play with temporary protected status? I know that solves a number of countries and people from a number of countries. Susan and I, a couple of years ago through JFS, helped a couple of, I guess they were cousins, brothers,
Yeah,
who had worked for the U.S. military in Afghanistan and had no choice but to get out of there. And now we lost track of them. I don't know whether they've been deported or not, but struck me as the height of hypocrisy that, you know, current administration is vilifying, and I grant that the retreat of U.S. Personnel from Afghanistan wasn't the niftiest thing we've done, but now they want to send those people who helped us for all those years back to deal with the Taliban. But I mean, in general, I don't expect you to have.
Well, there were about 18 different countries that had some kind of temporary protected status applied to them, and often previous administrations used temporary protected status as a much faster way to get someone approved to get a visa to the U.S. because the refugee process is so long and so time consuming. Because they put in those huge security measures after 9/11. There were already very stringent security screenings in place for refugees before 9/11, but they made it even much more difficult. Even though we have never actually had a refugee commit an act of terror on U.S. soil. We've had some asylum seekers, the Boston Marathon bombers, their parents had been in the U.S. already and got asylum, although it looks like they were radicalized in the U.S., not from their home country of Chechnya. But anyway, so what the U.S. has done is used temporary protected status as a faster way to get individuals who are in danger in their countries here to the U.S. And so for Afghans, most Afghans had been granted a visa called special immigrant visa, which was sort of very similar to a refugee visa. They were eligible for all the same benefits that refugees received. But again, it didn't take as long as the refugee screening process, but it took a lot longer than was going to be helpful with the very quick US withdrawal from Afghanistan. So when that happened, they started using TPS as a way to quickly get a lot of those Afghans here to the US. And for years after the withdrawal, refugee and other activist organizations were lobbying Congress to adjust that status to make them full special immigrant visa holders or give them refugee status in the event, because TPS can be withdrawn by any president at any time. And that is what this president has done. So he has withdrawn temporary protected status from Venezuelans, depending on what years they arrived. First, he withdrew for the Venezuelans that came in 2023. Then it ended for Venezuelans who had arrived in 2021. Afghans, Cameroon, Nepal, Honduras, Nicaragua, Venezuela, again, another group. Syria, South Sudan, Myanmar, Ethiopia, Haiti, Yemen, Somalia, Lebanon, El Salvador, and Sudan. Have all had their temporary protected status terminated or ended earlier than it was supposed to be ended by the administration. And even Ukraine, they were going to end temporary protected status, but instead they just have not extended it, and they're looking at it supposedly on a case-by-case basis. just today it was reported that the Afghans who had not been given temporary protected status, but they had been evacuated to Qatar, there's about 1,500 of them that now, instead of, because we had promised them, oh, we're working on it, we're going to get you here through some kind of TPS visa, the Trump administration is now threatening to send them to Democratic Republic of Congo. No, it is one of the most horrific, the betrayal of the Afghans. I mean, among a lot of horrors, I think that is up there near the top of what has been done, because almost all of these people served alongside US forces. They are in danger because of that service to US forces. Ask any veteran who worked with the Afghans and they're like, they are my brothers in arms, they are veterans, just like US. And we have, you know, luckily, you know, the ones who came under SIV holders are in a good position. The TPS folks are gonna have to decide whether they, again, go back, or they will almost certainly be killed, or they now live in the United States as an undocumented immigrant. And the folks in Qatar may be sent to a country that, frankly, is a country that produces a huge number of refugees because the situation is so horrible on the ground. They have no common language, they have no common culture, et cetera. So it is just a horror. I can't tell you. I mean, every week has been another unbelievable. And the administration in Minnesota started attacking resettled refugees and saying that if you had been resettled under the Biden administration, you had not yet adjusted your status. And keep in mind, this whole past year, they've not been processing adjustment of status applications, that they were going to review their granting of refugee status and may deport them. They started literally bursting into people's homes at gunpoint in Minneapolis, putting people on airplanes, and bringing them to Texas to interview them to find out if they deserved really to be a refugee. And then they just left them there if they didn't deport them. So a court order put a stop to that. But they're still trying to do that. And they're still saying they're going to review all of the refugee visas that were granted during the Biden administration for people who have not yet adjusted status. There has been mixed, mostly negative actions by the courts. The courts have largely upheld the right of the administration to terminate TPS. There was recently, though, a ruling staying the termination of TPS for Haitians, which is surprising because, again, most other courts, unfortunately, this is one of the areas where they have sided with the administration. So we don't know how that one is going to play out, but largely they have allowed the administration to terminate temporary protected status. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
You cheered us all up.
Hi, this is about specific legislation in Colorado that I know, apart from the minimum wage debate with the ag workers that just basically blew up. And I know there was also a bill recently regarding going into geocenters and access to that. And I was wondering if any of you could talk about how a lot of us think that this is a one-sided partisan issue, but really it's turning out that it's very bipartisan against these things that are very pro-immigrant and very pro even transparency. And if any of you could speak to that, and if there's any other legislation that we could be aware of, that we could contact our, you know, Congress people about, and yeah.
And if that's too long a question, one of the options would be for you to send me the information and then you make this out. I think it's an excellent thing. And that is often how we end these programs, which is what can we do? What can legal and voters do to be supported? What are your suggestions? Can you hear me? What are your suggestions about what we can do and how we can be active in trying to save this democracy for everyone?
So I will say there are still a couple of good bills going through the legislature. There are some negative bills going through the legislature, but one of the biggest things we're concerned about is a ballot initiative called Ballot Initiative number 95. that is coming up. Unfortunately, it already has the signatures. The wording of it makes it sound so reasonable, but it is very insidious, and it would require all, basically all government employees in the state, particularly law enforcement, to report any individual who has either been charged with a felony, and keep in mind, there are lots of nonviolent felonies, or, and they know that the person does not have documentation, or if they are charged with a crime and simply don't know or can't verify the documentation status. So that will completely flip current Colorado law, which keeps local law enforcement out of federal immigration enforcement for so many important safety reasons, including, you know, the fact that you've got individuals, you know, who might be engaged in a domestic violence situation. They're not going to report that if they can't trust police not to report that. It's anyway, almost all police will tell you, we do not want to be involved in immigration enforcement because it undermines our ability to keep our communities safe and have the trust of those communities. So that's the, you know, I will send some information about some of the specific bills, but keep your eye on 95 and please vote against.
And we can send out an alert.
Yes. It's a ballot initiative. It's already got all the signatures. It's on there.
It's on the Denver or the Colorado?
Colorado, yeah, everybody's ballot.
I'll also say, you know, a lot, we work in the tax and budget space, and so much of what we hear, particularly around Tabor, is, well, we can't touch that because I thought our constituents don't talk to us about it. They don't care about that. And so I think to what you were saying, immigration is never an issue. No one wants to touch it. No one is brave enough, honestly, to talk about the reason that we need, all the reasons that we need to talk about it. And so it may seem simple, but calling your legislators and saying you care about immigration and you want to see policies that support and protect our communities and our family members, and bring it up in town halls and call them and email them and tell them, no, you need to be talking about immigration. And if shameless plug, to the ballot, there's so much moving. The legislature is currently moving the long bill, which is the state's budget bill. And as many of you, I'm sure already know, we're facing a $1.5 billion budget deficit. And all the things that are coming from the federal government, big reason, you know, the bill that passed last year has, we're facing the impacts of those now. They are unfortunately having to make cuts to a lot of services and programs. It's not, if they're going to cut something, it's what are they going to cut, and how much. So much of that is around Salud and Coloradans, which are healthcare programs for documented folks or for immigrants. And so
for refugees and asylees, because they're going to lose their insurance. So exactly. This is the only way they're going to get insurance as of October 1.
And so much of this conversation in Colorado, particularly because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, Tabor, I know it's a good company, is because we don't have money in the state of Colorado, a really wealthy state, and we are cutting just about everything. And so the League, Colorado Fiscal Institute, many of our partners, were part of a coalition called Protect Colorado's Future Coalition. To what Paul was saying about the ballots, we are hoping to get a initiative 195 on the ballot that would strike out one sentence in Tabor that requires all income to be taxed at the same rate, and institute a graduated income tax, which is what we have at the federal level. And so we have to have money in Colorado because we know that all these changes, particularly this year on Medicaid, are going to hit in October, and a ton of people are going to lose healthcare. And we do not have the money in the state to be able to support people the way we need to.
With regard to that, and your organization, I noticed that you put out education and all of that. It just seems to me that there's so much misunderstanding about Tabor, and I heard even on NPR, like it's just kind of, it's this light and jovial, like, oh, don't expect your Tabor refunds. And I just think there needs to be a counter to that. that Tabor refund, go buy a road with your Tabor refund. Fund a library with your Tabor, anyway, they're just really, I just have to say.
So, that's exactly right. You're exactly right, and that's why we need all of you, and I had to make this plug, I have my petition with me if folks are interested in signing. But let's talk, because so much of our work is educating folks, and what we find is that most folks don't know about Tabor, and those who do know are typically just know about the rebates, which are not guaranteed, do not come every year, and the amounts that we saw from 2022 happened for a variety of reasons, including so much federal money coming in because of the pandemic. Yeah, right.
But usually it's like enough to go to McDonald's, like, wouldn't you rather have a library?
I don't know.
than a hospital or school?
It's my understanding that the graduated income tax that you're trying to get signatures for will not affect Tabor refunds. So people need to understand their Tabor refunds are not going to be impacted by this.
But I'm just talking bigger picture.
Yes.
Like, they need to know
Yeah.
those refunds impact our state
Right.
and the fiscal structure and all of that.
But
That's one of those signals, it's over.
that wasn't a hint. I don't know why. They put it on a timer. I apologize. Sarah will get the lights back on. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. This was a great program. Thank you.